morning and welcome to another exciting show. And tonight we've got Andrew Johnson. Good evening, Andrew. And we hope everything is well with yourself. I can see you've got your sun hat perched on the door behind you. That's very optimistic considering it's been raining so much.
Well, it's an overhang from the so-called summer.
Yes. You're like me. The thatching's gone a little bit on the top. So you have to wear a hat in the summer because it burns your scalp.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, tonight we're covering some really interesting, well, it's always interesting with Andrew, but it's a particular interest of mine. And we see how it goes in chat as well. The Starchild, if I got that correct, skulls. So we'll be going on to that a little bit later. But first of all, some news coming up. We'll be here on Monday as well. And my guest there is on this coming Monday will be Chris the gardener, but we won't be talking about gardening. And also coming up, I'm arranging to do a show with Dr. Miles Fleetwood, and he's going to talk about cold remedies and things like that for the winter. And it's going to be quite, and we've also got John Hamer coming back as well. But we're going to do recorded shows with John because I've got to be careful because up until December, I'm on a sort of probation period with YouTube because I've been a very, very naughty boy because I had a week's ban and a video taken down. And over this last week, I've had another video taken down, but they haven't given me a week ban because the video is from about 3 years ago. So what's going on, I really do not know. But what I do know is I've got to get off of YouTube as quickly as I possibly can because that's not the place, I think. So anyway, over to you, Andrew. These skulls. Would you like to show the illustration that you sent me?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll need to sort of get that up on the screen. There we go. So I think that many of your viewers and listeners will be familiar with this to some degree. And for those that are familiar, really, there hasn't really been anything else new to say about this skull since about 2016, 2017. And arguably, the information from that time it was to do with the cover-up rather than new evidence about the skull itself. But as you can see here, this slide kind of debunks one of the claims about the skull immediately because it says that no experts have looked at it, and they say that any expert that looks at it just says that it's a deformed human skull. And we'll get onto all the story of it shortly, but if you look at this in Wikipedia, it'll say it's a deformed human skull, and it is not deformed, and it is not human. And the evidence, regarding this is pretty conclusive. I say it's very conclusive. So we'll move on. And for those, again, that are not aware, this research really was all collected together by Lloyd Pye, and we're approaching the 10th anniversary of his death, actually. He really was working with this skull on and off for a period of nearly 14 years, and might have been slightly over 14 years, actually. And he came to the conclusion that it wasn't from a human being, it wasn't from an ape, it wasn't from anything that was in our evolutionary chain, really, or connected with it. It was independent of that, and you'll see why. I won't read all this text out, but it's really a dedication to Lloyd Pye. I took this picture. I took both these pictures actually, and he ended up using this top one, I think, on his website quite a bit. I took that with a Canon A60 camera back in 2005, I think, around that time, and that was taken in London. And the lower picture was taken, in BBC Radio Leeds when we did a conference, Anthony Beckett's conference in 2009, the Exopolitics conference. I think it was the first one that he did, and we put that together. I helped Anthony a little bit with some things, but Lloyd did the Starchild Skull presentation. He went on to Radio Leeds. He showed the replicas that we see here. So he stayed at my house. That's us together at BBC Radio Leeds in 2009. And, I got to know him very well. And so I know that he was an honest chap. He was an ordinary chap. He had a smutty sense of humour like I do. He used to tell dirty jokes in his presentation sometimes. Just a very, ordinary guy from the US. And he was a friend to everyone, really. He was a friend to everyone. But looking at the skull itself, we can probably go through most of this. There's nothing really different to what I've covered before and what Lloyd's covered before, really. And those that do subscribe to Check the Evidence YouTube channel will have seen that I uploaded a video about 3 weeks ago, I think it was, which was this presentation, basically, which I gave in 2017 at a place in Medstead, to a small conference there. So this is the same as that. So anyone that's seen that video, will have seen all of this, basically. Robert's asked a question: has the DNA been extracted from the skull? Yes, it has. That will be covered later on, if we get time. Mm-hmm. So there are basic physical differences which we'll go through between the Starchild skull and the human skull. There was some X-ray analysis done. There was a dental analysis done. Skepticism and debunking attempts have been rife and continue to this day. And the false claims are made about it all the time, as I say, Wikipedia being a case in point. And the final part of this is the DNA analysis. And I have got, I suppose, a little bit of additional information about that, which I acquired quite recently, but it's not really, it's more a procedural thing than about the skull itself. So the Starchild Skull is owned by Melanie Young. She lives in El Paso, Texas, and lives with her husband, Ray Young. And there's a whole story behind that as well. Basically, what happened was the skull was discovered in a cave in Mexico in 1930, about 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua. You can find that on Google Maps and stuff if you want. An American teenage girl was on vacation with her family near Mexico's Copper Canyon region, and she went exploring alone and found a long abandoned mine tunnel. We've got a slide here. This is the sort of terrain. This isn't the actual place. We still don't know exactly where the skull was discovered, but Lloyd always said that, we could go and find it if we really wanted to. But that wasn't, a big concern of his, really, because we had enough evidence with the skull itself, essentially, to prove what it wasn't, even if we couldn't prove exactly what it was. So inside this cave, the girl found a full human skeleton lying on its back, and beside that, with an arm sticking out and the hand going over another skeleton, she dug through the sort of fairly loose grit and dirt in the cave, and she dug out these two skulls. Or she dug out more bones, but when she took them away, there was a flash flood. She hid them temporarily in a gully, and then there was a flash flood, and a lot of the bones washed away. And when she went back the next day, because she was told not to go into these caves, said don't go in. But she went in, being a teenage girl, and she then found these skulls. And one of the important little elements is that the staining on the skulls, because they're stained on one side, we'll see that later, matches the story that they were half buried on one side in the earth. So that does match, among many other things. And so the 5 viewing angles reveal the most obvious of the 25 major physical differences between a human skull and the Starchild skull. Now, the arrangement of bones within the skull, because the skull isn't a single bone, there are several bones. I don't know how many, but as you can see, there are at least 3 large bones. Lloyd knew the names of all these bones, but I don't know the names of all of them. But then you see the suture lines. Say if you take the top center picture, which is the human skull on the top, and yeah, there's should be no feedback from my end, I don't think, but I don't know if you can mute your do something with your sound, Chris. Stephen's getting a bit of feedback.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll mute this.
Yeah. So you can see we've got the lines, which the central suture lines in the top and bottom center pictures, center images, but they're very different. And you can see you've got like a sort of, I don't know, an apple shape in the Starchild skull at the bottom in the center one. And then you've got a kind of much more square type of shape on the human skull at the top. And the apple, it looks like an apple even more from the top view, which is the 4th image from the left in the lower one. So, you know, it's I mean, right there you can see it's very different, and you can see the difference in the eye sockets. We'll go into that a little bit more as well. So the human female, which was found with the Starchild skull, that served as a good comparison. It's almost like that was a gift to us, really, to have the same skull in the same conditions. And the skull was dated to 900 years old by carbon dating, plus or minus 40 years, and that was done twice, and with the same result. Both skulls were dated at 900 years old. So we're talking, you know, sort of 1300s, you know, 1200s, something like that, from when this thing was alive. And the skull, the eye sockets, they're 2 inches deep with humans, but in the Starchild, they're only half an inch deep. And you can see the eye sockets are very, very different, very different. And again, if you look on the side view, the ear holes, you can see these ear holes, the one in the human skull and the Starchild skull are lower down and they're different in shape. And then you've got the pterygoid plates, that's also very different. There is no inion. This inion here, this sticks out. You can see it's labeled with the sort of very light green arrows. On the human, you can see this like little nodule sticking out. You can feel the inion on your own skull if you feel in that place, at the back of your head. The Starchild skull has no inion. And again, you know, it's just totally different. It's totally different. You can see the human had a mild concussion. You've got this sort of crazing in the bone. So had some bang on the head from something. We obviously can't tell whether that's what killed the human female, but you know, it's there, a bit of evidence right there of something happening. So again, half an inch deep for the eye sockets on the Starchild on the right, 2 inches deep for the human on the left. And seeing that image again that I showed in the 5 views, we've got the Starchild's occipital is stretched high and flattened, though not as flat as if cradle boarded, lacks the inion bump of the human and female, as we saw on the other slide. The Starchild has uniform symmetrical crease, thus no upward pressure from hydrocephaly. So, you know, we've got this crease. This is shown later again on another slide. And this rules out hydrocephaly right there. So anyone that says that this is the skull of a hydrocephalic child is lying. It's as simple as that. They're either lying or they haven't studied the images or the replicas enough. Yeah, so there's this crease. You can see that a bit more clearly there. Totally different shape, totally different profile. Let's see, I'll just enlarge this a little bit. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to read anything out there because that just rules out hydrocephaly. Again, if you look underneath and you see, for example, where the neck muscles attached and stuff, this so-called basilar part as well, that's very different. It's more towards being circular on the human on the left, but it's more oval shaped on the Starchild. The front of the foramen magnum, the neck hole, is normally fused by age 25. Absence in the Starchild indicates less than 25 at death. If we think that it's, the way its body grows and behaves is similar to a human body, which it might be, it might not be. We can't really be sure of all the aspects of it. Yeah, that's right, Stephen. We'll probably get to that in a different slide. Thank you. So yeah, we have got some teeth. Yeah, we'll talk about the angle of the head as well a little bit. We've got a slide on that later to do with how that would have worked during what's called cradle boarding. And again, if you look at the area, and if again, you need to be more knowledgeable expert on this, but if you look at the area where all the neck muscles are attached on the human, you can see this with various sort of lines on the skull. You probably won't see it in this slide because you're not holding the skull close up. And then you can see on the right, the pattern of the attachment of muscles is very different. It's very different. Much smaller area where the muscles are attached. And the so-called zygomatic arches, which had become detached on the Starchild, I think there was one or two remaining on the human, very different in shape, much reduced on the Starchild on the right. And also the balance points where you kind of have this center of gravity of the skull, that is very different on the Starchild, indicating that the way that the muscles attached to the skull was different to a human being. So that's another very important factor, one of many. Similarly, if you look at how your jaw attaches to your skull, your jaw is actually a completely separate bone. It's not part of your skull. It only seems to be attached because it's attached by muscles which go onto the jaw and onto the skull as well. So the fact that your bottom of your mouth, seems to move with your skull is because it's attached by muscles, not by any bones or anything. So if you look at the area where the muscles attached for chewing, for example, then that is shown on the human on the left, and on the right we have a much smaller area. So experts know all these terms like, the mandibular fossa, the dents in the skull where the mandible or lower jaw fits, indicate a very narrow lower face. What does that remind you of, folks? Yes, its jaw would have been half the size of a human jaw, probably. So again, all very, very different to a human being.
Looks like an alien grey to me, that from an ignorant point of view.
Well, that's a pretty good approximation, I think. And, I think I've got a slide or two on that later that Lloyd had put together. Because most of these I just took out of Lloyd's presentation. Because I initially I helped him transfer the slides he had from 35mm transparency onto PowerPoint because I had a scanner, and that was one of the early times. He knew that I had a bit of expertise in IT and sorting things out with PowerPoint and stuff and scanning and whatnot. So that's how I came to get involved with some of the material, and stuff. And so I probably put some of these slides together. I think somebody else did some of them as well. I can't sort of say I did all of them, but I certainly helped him. But this was also very significant. This X-ray, which was done, as you see, in February 1999. On the left, we have the human, and these are frontal sinuses. These, let's just go back. These sort of looks a bit like a cauliflower or broccoli, florets. on the left. But in the Starchild, there were no sinuses. No sinuses. Now, originally, Lloyd thought this proved that it wasn't human because all humans are born with sinuses. But there are some rare cases where humans, born without sinuses, and they didn't learn that until later on. So what appeared to be a slam dunk wasn't at that point. So that was another very strange feature of the Starchild skull. And again, just looking at the X-ray, you can see it. It looks very smooth and well proportioned and symmetric on the right, where it's a little bit more lumpy, and it just seems a little bit more lumpy and asymmetric on the left. So, and then another X-ray from the side. This is kind of interesting and not obvious at first. Again, this is where if you're a radiologist or something, then you're probably going to have a better sort of understanding of this. But we can see, for example, these lines on the human female skull, and these lines are actually the veins, because as your brain grows, there is a blood supply going to the brain, and these veins get pressed into the skull, and you see these as a trace in the X-ray. So you have slight variations in the thickness of the bone because the veins are pressed against the skull during the growth of the baby and the fetus and everything. If like skulls, you don't get that. The hydrocephaly smooths out the surface of the skull, and you can't see the vein lines. With the Starchild, again on the right, you can see these vein lines, which again is another proof that this wasn't hydrocephaly. This wasn't a result of hydrocephaly. The other thing that this shows is indicated by the yellow arrow. You can see we've got essentially much more lighter grey in proportion on the right than on the left. So that means that this had a much greater cranial capacity. Well, it's right, not the veins themselves, Dan, it's the impression created by the veins during growth. That's essentially what it's like, a shadow of the vein, if you will, or a mold of the vein rather than the vein itself, because it's got imprinted on the bone during the skull forming, as it were. But I think now, this is like 20-year-old X-ray, and there's probably much more sophisticated technology now for giving even better X-ray images. So this shows you it had a much bigger brain capacity. Now, I've got a video here of Lloyd. I think I'll try and play this in the room. It's not very long. And this was one of the very last times I saw him alive, unfortunately. I think it was only a couple of months before he passed. But what it is was the replica skull, what they did was they were able to pour a material inside it so that they could do a brain cast and look what shape its brain was. And you can see just in the pictures there how different it is. Again, it looks a bit more sort of like a cauliflower on the left, particularly with a white appearance, and then on the Starchild, it's very, very different. But I've got a video which I'm going to try and play now if I can. Let's see. I might need to, let's see if I can go to this video file. I think I can try and do that. Let's go back to there. And there. This will take a couple of seconds to upload, but let's try that.
Right, okay. Should I play it now, Andrew?
Yeah, you can play that if it's uploaded, or that's fast if it has.
Looks like well, I can give it a try. Okay, here we go.
Hi, this is Lloyd Pye. I'm sitting here in London at the home of Belinda McKenzie, and I'm with my friend Andrew Johnson, who's filming me, and we're going to talk about the brain casts of the Starchild Skull and a typical human brain. Nobody's done this up to this point, so we figured it was time to put it out there and let people see the differences. As you can see, a human brain, and this comes from the lining of the inside of the skull, so that's really all you're seeing is the surface of the brain. But as you see, it's very lumpy. Everybody knows that a human brain, and really all animal brains, have convolutions like this that fold into the surface and leave these lumps and bumps, and it's just the way it is. But you also see very fine veins. When any creature's born, its bones, or the bones of a skull, are so soft that the brain itself presses in and the bone will take the shape of whatever's there. So you can get the fine degree of veins, all these bumps and lumps, and just a typical brain. So let's start out with that, just the surface, and you see the difference of the Starchild, completely smooth. I mean, just absolutely smooth, except for the suture lines, which are very visible, and the veins. Again, the veins you can see trailing off here, but no convolutions. No convolutions. So radical difference in that one area. Now another area of a radical difference is the frontal lobes. Now as you look and see, the human has frontal lobes, and that gives us our brow ridges. This fills in our brow ridges, and we all have that. And we all have this, and this is a lot of personality. This is a lot of who we are, what we are. Not so much thinking. It's where we make our good decisions and our bad decisions, our irrational moves, and make us crazy, and also allow us to do sometimes very good things. You notice the Starchild just does not have that. It just doesn't have frontal lobes at all. And it has no brow ridges, and that's one of the real distinctive differences about it. But you also see the extreme shallowness of the Starchild's eye socket compared to the human eye socket. Human goes that far down, Starchild goes that far down. Just a very, very radical, complete difference. It's just got a completely different kind of eyeball set. And one of the real interesting things about this fact was I was in Philadelphia early part of this year, and I was talking to a brain person and showing them this not long after they had been made, and they're just plastic injection molds. And she looked at this and she says, well, with eye sockets this shallow, the eye can't be an eye like we have. It can't be a ball that moves and looks through a kind of a tube, and we have peripheral vision. Everybody knows how our eyes move in these big, deep eye sockets. So as she was looking at it, she said, it has to be a kind of a flat eye. And I've been saying that for years whenever I lecture about it. So it has to be kind of a flat eye. And if it's a flat eye, in order to get 180 degrees of vision, and that's the purpose of vision when your eyes are in front of your head, you want to see at least 180 degrees around you. With us, we can move our eyes. We see through a tube, and then we have peripheral vision. With this, she said, if it's a flat eye stuck in the head and not moving, it has to be basically all pupil, all basically black, all pupil just sitting there taking in the whole field of vision at one time. But if it does that, that means it has to have a much bigger visual cortex in order to handle that much input all at once, all the time. So she flips it over. Let's look at the visual cortex. And she says, oh, wow, look at that. Look how expanded it is over compared to the human visual cortex. And the human visual cortex is this two knobby areas right here. And the Starchild is as much as twice really spread out over smaller knobs, but stretched, the area itself is stretched out over here. So, this is what she said, and this is what we take her word on, that this is good, strong evidence that the Starchild had a very, very different visual system than we do. And I've been saying it for a long time, just based on the difference in the eye sockets. and the way the optic foramens are set in, where the blood vessels and nerves come in and control the eyeball and feed the eyeball and all that. Completely different in the Starchild. So, all things considered, these are some interesting aspects to add to the great mystery between the Starchild and humans, and of course, what is the Starchild?
That's interesting.
Okay.
That's it. Ancient Ruby's got an interesting one here.
I don't think the gender was ever established, and you'll perhaps see why that's the case later as we go through. That video there was just finishing off. It hadn't loaded the last bit, but not there was much to see. We did that in one take. I just turned him. I didn't even know when I saw Lloyd that day that he had those. I think he just got them done a week or two prior, and again, it just proved everything that he was saying, that he'd been saying for the last sort of 12 years or so, it just proves that it's not human. Thanks for the compliment. I appreciate that. So if you want to go back to the other slides, Chris, I think there should be a click over that. So we go on from there now. So now we can look at the teeth. Now, one of the things I didn't say or properly describe earlier was a bit of the Starchild's jaw did survive, the so-called maxilla, which is the little bit of the jaw, which is like the top part underneath, well, your tongue's underneath it, basically. It's the top part of the jaw, which most of that are broken off on the Starchild Skull, but a little piece survived. And, teeth were in there, and they used one of these teeth for the DNA tests as well. But there was a dental study done, and in fact, more or less the first or second time I met Lloyd, this dentist, he came to Belinda Mackenzie's house. I mean, there's a whole other story about Belinda Mackenzie, which we won't have time to get into here, but this dentist came and he listened to Lloyd's presentation back then. That was 2004. And then he volunteered to x-ray the teeth. I think there's a slide of that later. But this was from another chap called Ken Pye. He looked at the teeth and the skulls, and he could see that there was wear and on the Starchild Skull tooth. So he didn't think it was a child because it had got wear on it, and it significant wear. So it didn't seem to indicate that this was like a 7-year-old child, which was an age put forward by one of the dentists. Let's see if that's on here. So what they've done on this slide is they got the two bits that you saw there, and the one bit that they saw there, and they've done a mirror image on it because it was roughly half, and then sort of interpolated a bit. So that gives you an idea of what the lower part of the top, the top of the mouth would have been. So this is, the tongue would be in this space here. But if you look at this close up, it looks quite big here because it's enlarged. But the Starchild either had a very small tongue or no tongue at all. So if it had no tongue at all, then the way it spoke and formed words would have been very different, or maybe it didn't speak at all. So how would it communicate it? Well, I'm sure you can make an educated guess. And it doesn't involve gesturing physically either. So this was done by this dentist in London, because he said to Lloyd, I've got an x-ray machine at my dental practice, so if you bring along the fragment, I'll x-ray it for you. And within this fragment, it's a bit difficult to decipher this, I know, but the dentist said that it had what are called unerupted teeth. So there were like adult teeth in this piece of jawbone, which were still inside the bone, basically. Well, there you are. That's kind of what I was implying. This is why, one of the reasons why they thought it was a child. Originally because it was a small skull, or looked small to pick up, but actually its cranial capacity is much higher. I think I've got a slide about that because we haven't mentioned that yet. But the teeth also seemed to indicate it was a child. But then the teeth which were out The ones that were worn seem to indicate it was an older being, not child. So the dental evidence as regards the age is inconclusive. And then, so yeah, if it's an alien, it is an assumption that its lifespan mirrors that of humans. Yeah, it could be. We don't know how old it was. Yeah, could be shorter or longer. Absolutely, we don't know. Don't know. I just don't. We don't have enough information really to answer that question. I don't think, not from what we have so far. I think somebody knows exactly where it's from, but I don't. Well, only one that we know of. I mean, there have been a couple of others which have come up, which I'll mention later on. I've got a couple of slides on that. So this was done again by a forensic pathologist, I think. He was somebody in London that Lloyd met in 2004, and he'd taken portions of the bone, put it, used a Dremel tool to cut it up, and he was using techniques that he'd, did in analysis of samples for court cases. And when he was doing this, he found these fibers inside the bone that were woven into the bone. And these are not seen in any reptilian or mammalian bone on Earth. These are not veins, they're not capillaries, they're not lymph nodes or anything like that. They never found out what these were, only that they were there. They don't know what they're made of. They don't know how they survived the cutting of the Dremel blade. It was just bizarre. No one could explain it. No one has tried to explain it. Fibers are not seen in bone, in any mammalian bone or in any bone of any species on Earth. So that's another reason why it's probably not from Earth. And this is really, for me, is a slam dunk. You see this right there. You know that this can't be human. You can always disregard everything else, because here we have the cross section of the bone. You can see the human is 9 millimeters thick. It's quite thick when you think about that. And the Starchild is 3 millimeters thick, which is one of the reasons why it has an increased cranial capacity, because there was less bone and more air in there. Was evidenced, DNA found that the possible mother found with the Starchild was related. As far as I'm aware, no. That evidence kind of changed because the DNA testing got better. But we'll come on to the DNA a bit later. So other tests were done on the chemistry of the bone. In other words, what are the elements in the bone, and the balance of elements in the human bone and the proportions and the quantities was rather different to the Starchild. I mean, again, that just proves it's not human. You can't have bone which is that different in chemistry, like much more carbon in it, more oxygen, more aluminium. You can't have that. You can't have that and it still be human. So this, as far as I'm aware, proves, and some people would blame the spikes on contamination of the bone sample, but I'm sure that this was done with that being in mind. So that bone chemistry indicates that the Starchild bone is much more like collagen, which is like tooth enamel, than the human bone is. So that's what Lloyd said. It's like tooth enamel. So it's got a higher level of collagen, which means it's more like tooth enamel. It isn't collagen completely. It's got collagen in it. I got that a bit wrong. And then also we had this other test that was done by Ken Pye, visual test, and he saw these red little flecks within the bone. So when he sliced through a section of bone, there were these red flecks in the cancellous holes, and they looked like sort of dried red blood cells, or dried blood. It wasn't that. It wasn't dried blood, because this was 900 years old. All that material which just gets eaten away by bacteria. So it can't have been old blood or anything. It wasn't that. Something else. And again, they never found out what that was. It could be organic, it could be inorganic. It's not bone marrow, it's nothing like that. And again, you can just see more of that here in this. You can see, this is very tiny. It looks big, but it's actually a very zoomed in view, and that, it's only like a centimetre or so long, that, something like that. So what do you do with this evidence? We haven't even got to the DNA yet. Well, you can't explain it. And to me, it is proof of an alien being having lived on the Earth at least once 900 years ago. I can't view it any other way. I've been saying that for years, and Lloyd eventually, became convinced of that. Initially, he thought that probably was the case, but what do skeptics say? Well, there's about there's 2 or 3 things they say. Well, they claim that the shape of the skull proves that it was cradle-boarded. That's a lie. They claim it's a victim of hydrocephaly. That is also a lie. I've already shown you that, but there's a couple more things I haven't shown you yet. They claim it's a victim of progeria. So that is also a lie. It can't be progeria because progeria victims, as we'll come on to, have very weak bone. The bone is very brittle and breaks very easily. It's not properly formed. Not true with the Starchild. So as we'll go on to that in a minute. So cradle boarding, if you look at the female X-ray we showed earlier, revisit that, you can see that it's actually got a straight section on the back. And this proves that this was a human skull that was cradle boarded. Now, what is cradle boarding? Well, if you're living in a sort of rough life, living off the land, and you've got to keep a family to feed, when you've had a baby, as soon as you can get back up on your feet, basically you're going to put that baby on a board on your back and carry on digging up the fields or working the land, planting, whatever you need to do, so that you eventually will have enough food to live. And so that is what young mothers would do. They would get the baby, strap its head onto a board, put it in a thing like this, a sling of some kind, strap that to a board, put it on the back of you, put it on your back, and you carry on working. But when the baby is young, the skull, as you know, is still a little bit soft, so that leads to a flattening of the back of the skull. And that can happen with just ordinary people that, spend time in a cot. It does happen. So the human skull was cradle boarded. Well, Starchild wasn't cradle boarded. It's not flat. It kind of looks level, but it's not. It's got lumps and bumps which are not present on the human cradle boarded skull. So that is, whoever says it's cradle boarded is a liar. They should say, oh, actually, yeah, I can see what you're saying now. Yeah, it's not cradle boarded. I was wrong, but they don't say that. Somebody made a comment about the neck angle. Well, again, if the Starchild was cradle boarded, then it would have choked to death. You can see that in the bottom right image there. It couldn't have been cradle boarded because it would have choked to death because of the angle of its neck. We didn't talk a lot about the angle that the neck attaches to. The other thing I can pause, if you look at the top right picture, just it's all the same skull and everything on the right, but there's an important thing we haven't touched on, because if you look at the inside of the skull, I haven't got a slide for this, but you can put your finger up inside the neck hole of the Starchild skull, and I believe it's smooth inside. Now this means that the brain, if it had been ordinary human brain, the same consistency as human brain, same viscosity is the amount which a liquid flows, that how stodgy it is, that's the viscosity. It's a measurement in physics. Then if that had been normal human brain, it literally would have slid out of the skull and gone down the neck. The brain wouldn't be in the skull anymore. So the way that is arranged tells us that the material that the Starchild's brain was made of must have been very different to what human brain is made of. So that's another slam dunk, really, as far as I'm concerned. So we talked about hydrocephaly. Well, in case you're not familiar, this poor child on the picture has hydrocephaly. When the baby is born and the skull bones are not fused, then the child has a problem in that spinal fluid actually goes up into the cranial cavity, the skull, and it doesn't come out again. So the skull eventually inflates and inflates and inflates. And if it's not treated, they can treat it with stents. I tell the story that when I was tutoring in further education, one of the students in my class, he had hydrocephaly, and he had what's called a stent put in his neck, and you could see it, under the skin, and he was fine. He was able to live a normal life, but without the stent, he would have eventually died. And the skull breaks apart because the bones don't fuse. So that's how it is. And you can see the hydrocephalic skull on the bottom right pair of images. It's labeled there. It's not hydrocephalic. It's not hydrocephaly. And again, it's not hydrocephaly. This is a hydrocephalic suture line on the right, and you can see the gap there. Again, the veins, which I've already mentioned, no fluid was on the Starchild's brain, not hydrocephaly, not hydrocephaly, not hydrocephaly. Progeria, well, what's progeria? Well, it's this premature aging where as soon as you're born, you start to experience the effects of aging. So you end up with baldness, as it says on the right, swollen veins, absence of eyebrows and eyelashes, beak-shaped nose, shrunken chin, premature cardiac disease, narrow chest, etc., swollen and stiff joints, age spots. Now, obviously, we can't use all of those factors because we don't have the skin.
I think Andrew's lost contact there. Oh, he's
back.
back.
I just had to mute. So I occasionally have to mute.
Okay. This is a brilliant presentation. So thanks, Andrew. This is fantastic. Really fascinating. So please.
Thank you. Yeah, it's it's all pretty solid stuff, really. So yeah, they're just total liars because we have brittle bones. And we'll see on the next slide. Now, the shape is, you can say that really the reason why they've said it's progeria is because the overall shape of the progeria victim skull kind of matches the Starchild. But that's about the only thing that does. And even then, it's not a great match. You can see here they're trying to show this. So you can see why they've said it. But beyond that, it's really can do, folks. Because with a progeria victim, you have these, as I say, the individual bones of the skull are not fused. You have this big gap here, and that's all fused up on the Starchild. So that proves, again, it's the fontanelle, that area that's. And if you've got a young child, you can actually, a child less than about a year old, you can actually feel that soft. I remember doing it with all my nephews or nieces when they were a tiny baby, and you can feel this little depression in the head, and it feels a bit squidgy, and it's a bit sort of spongy. So those are the facts. And again, you look at these X-rays. I managed to find this, and this is like an X-ray of a progeria victim on the left. And again, you can sort of see some similarities to the X-ray of the Starchild, but again, there's many differences. So it's not going to work, folks. So again, if you search for the Starchild Skull in your area, people can try this online if they want. You can go and read the Wikipedia entry. I'll see if I can find the little video clip I've got of Lloyd. Let's see if I can find this. Oops. No, I want to go present again. I've got another clip of Lloyd, I think. Let's see if I can. I might not be able to find it. But this is basically, no, maybe it's not in here. I don't know. Is it in here?
I think that.
Never mind. Yeah, so it doesn't matter, but we can get. So basically, Lloyd Pye, he had a sort of a bit of a ding dong with Wikipedia, and he went to their editors, and he explained this in a presentation which he gave in Nottingham in 2009. I organised that presentation for him, and he told the whole story of Wikipedia. Like, he basically says, well, you know, you go onto Wikipedia and you try and edit the Starchild's entry to include any of the evidence that I've shown you, and if it lets you change it, then within 48 hours it will be changed back to how it was. You can't change it. You can't change it. So, you know, you can't change it. It's the Ministry of Truth.
Spot on there. Yes, I agree with you 100%. Yes, absolutely.
Now, there was another clip that I've got here. I don't think I'll include this though, because that it flags up a copyright. You can see this in the presentation that I uploaded a few weeks ago. So if you go and find that, in fact, what I'll do is I'll put that link in the chat room here so that people can have a click on that. If I go on to my history and see if I can find it, and see if, yeah, that's that one. Yeah, let's try that. So I'll put a couple of links in the chat box. That's the one on my channel of this presentation. Oops, maybe it's not. I don't know if it's going in the chat box. It's giving me an error for some reason. Maybe it's because it's a link. Anyway, and I'll put the other one in. But that's probably not going to work either because I think it's blocking my YouTube links. Can anybody see any links in the chat box?
No, there isn't. Try putting it on private chat, and then I'll do it on a banner running across the bottom. What about that? So I wonder if it.
We can try, but yeah, it's hard for people to copy it. It's hard for people to copy it from the thing, but I'll try doing that.
I can put checktheevidence.com. I think you are .com, aren't you?
Yes, but it's not on there. It's on YouTube.
Okay, right.
So you can try and paste that link into the chat box if you want from the private to the public. I don't know if it'll work for you. It might. So that's one.
Comes just one moment.
And then I'll put the other one in as well into the private chat. So that's the one of Lloyd, his presentation. But anyway, so going on to this slide.
This is the one. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Andrew. This, what I put here now, that link, people can copy it down or paste it or anything like that. And I'll put that link below at the end of the show. So I think it's the best.
Yeah, you need to get rid of that opens in new tab though, because that'll mess it up. I think we might mess it up. So it's just, anyway, it's on my website. You can find it. So basically what happened was one time there were these three guys. I can't remember. Bill Burns was one, and I can't remember the name of the other two guys. They included the Starchild Skull on a UFO Hunters program in 2009, and it was pretty good. It's quite a good episode. You can find it on YouTube if you want, I think, still, even though it's, 10, 12 years old now, 14 years old, whatever it is. And Lloyd is in that episode as well. At that time, he didn't have all the DNA evidence, which I'll try and get to before we finish. But anyway, they took the skull to this guy on the right, David Aguilar, who was a Harvard researcher or lecturer. I don't know if he's got a PhD. I think he does have a PhD. He was some type of exobiologist or something, and he was pontificating about alien life, and he was saying, oh yeah, we might have alien life in our galaxy, but it could be completely different to humans. It probably would be. It wouldn't have evolved the same way, or anything, and blah, blah, blah. And he draws all these pictures on the board, and he talks about probability and things like that. And then they pull out the Starchild Skull replica, and they put it in his hand. And just prior to this, he says, I'd love to bring one of these guys into a real lab and have everybody take a look at it as in an alien being. They're talking about alien beings. When he said that, I don't know if it's immediately he said it or a few moments after, but they pull the Starchild Skull out. It's the replica, not the real one. I'd love to bring one of these guys into a real lab and have everybody take a look at it. Then they show him the Starchild Skull, and Bill Burns says it could be a human hybrid, which was thought for several years because the first DNA tests were done. But that idea was later ruled out, really, because of more accurate DNA tests, which was done in 2011 and 2012. And so Bill Burns says, well, actually, it could be some sort of hybrid. And then Agler just says, oh, prove it. He didn't say, what, really? Oh, can I take this and get this lab tested? What he really meant was, I don't want to take this into a lab and have everybody look at it because I would be finished with all my speculative fun that I get paid to do on documentaries like this. He didn't want to know what the truth was. He was just interested in his little, dance around the is there extraterrestrial life or not question. And this is a general problem, actually, with people. People prefer not knowing the truth, and they prefer the mystery than actually solving it because it's a hobby to, it's like when what have I got for Christmas sort of thing, Once you know what you've got for Christmas, it's less fun. It's that kind of mentality that a lot of people have. Some of them, of course, are just scared of the implications as well, which is what it's more like with the Starchild Skull. So DNA testing, what happened with that? People have been asking. Well, what you need to understand is a little bit about DNA. It's bandied around a lot. DNA is made up of these base pairs, and there are 4 amino acids that are in these base pairs, which are, I think it's on the next slide. So a human chromosome has, a human cell has 46 chromosomes, 2 meters of DNA in each cell, 3 billion DNA subunits called base pairs, and approximately 30,000 genes code for proteins that perform most functions. So we've got these 4 amino acids, thymine, adenine, guanine, and cytosine, and they're what make up all DNA in, all of the Earth's life, really. But how do you, there are 2 areas you can primarily look for DNA. One is inside the cell nucleus of any cell, and the other is outside the cell nucleus. Or rather, in the nucleus, and then you've got the mitochondria. So you've got mitochondrial DNA. Now that DNA comes from the maternal side, from your mum. And there are only 16,569 base pairs in all human mitochondrial DNA. However, the nuclear DNA comes from both the mother and the father. And there are about 3 billion base pairs. So you have a choice. When you do a DNA sampling test, you can either recover nuclear DNA or you can recover mitochondrial DNA, or both. And originally, what they did in 2003 was they managed to recover a bit of mitochondrial DNA from the human, and it's very difficult because these skulls are 900 years old, so you need special techniques to recover ancient DNA. And I think, the first test was very, very primitive, and they claimed to have recovered the DNA from the Starchild Skull's tooth, but actually they only recovered 200 picograms. And you can see this PCR here. People probably know now what that PCR means, polymerase chain reaction, because of COVID. That's what the COVID test was based on, this DNA test. They were doing a DNA test of a virus, supposedly of a supposed DNA test of a viral cell. But anyway, this PCR test was done on the DNA of the tooth, and they claimed that they got a human reading from it. So that in 1999, it was declared that the Starchild Skull was human. The DNA proved it, and Lloyd said he was finished. He was dead in the water. Because that result said human, everyone thought it was human, and nobody wanted to know any different. But he knew it wasn't human. You could see that from all of the physical evidence and the stuff that we've already covered. and some other things we haven't covered really. So then they did a second DNA test in 2003 with a company called Trace Genetics. And Trace Genetics was actually acquired by DNA Print Genomics in 2005. And I have to say that because people will say, oh, Andrew, you're lying. There's no such company as Trace Genetics. And it's true, there is no such company as Trace Genetics now. But that's because, as I said on the slide, it was acquired by DNA Print Genomics in 2005. And they've probably been acquired by somebody else since then. So these are the picture of the two guys that did the DNA tests. And they were able to show that they didn't get any nuclear DNA from the Starchild, but they did get nuclear DNA from the human, and they got correspondences between the human female and the Starchild's mitochondrial DNA. So I think there were some correspondences there. So they assumed at that point that its mother was human, but the father was an alien because they couldn't get any of the nuclear DNA, and therefore it must be an alien. So Lloyd was going around between, I think, 2003 and 2010 saying, we think it's an alien-human hybrid, and that was based on the best guess about the DNA tests that were done in 2003. 6 failed attempts proved beyond any doubt that the bold lab result was wrong. In 6 full attempts, Dr. Essman and Dr. Marley could not detect the Starchild's nuclear DNA by polymerase chain reaction. Given that nuclear DNA was easily recovered from the control skull, which was the human one, they concluded that the nuclear DNA of the Starchild was not human, and that was kind of correct. But it was a bit more complicated than that. So that Lloyd was saying it was alien-human hybrid. However, new DNA recovery techniques came along in July 2006, and this was a new technique developed by 454 Life Sciences. And I was recently in contact with somebody who was kind of working in the field back then, and he knew about these techniques. And the human genome was sequenced at base pair level. And this meant that you didn't actually need primers, because the way that the DNA test worked up to then is that you had 2 bits of a jigsaw, and what you did is you put in one bit of the jigsaw into solution, and that plugged into another piece of the DNA you were trying to collect, and then that pulled it out. But they developed this new technique where they could see the pieces of DNA, in situ, as it were, and you didn't need these primers. So you didn't need to guess what bits of the DNA were like. You could just get the DNA that was there. You didn't have to, drop down into it and try and attach something to it. You could get it, as it was, basically. So in 2010, a new geneticist had seen one of Lloyd's videos or his website or his articles or something. I know that his first name was Vladimir. I know that he was working for a company that didn't want their name disclosed, but they gave him permission to do the testing on the equipment and that in slack time. So they let him do it behind the scenes. And in February 2010, he was given a bone sample from the Starchild skull, and away he went. And then a month later or so, he had recovered dozens of fragments of DNA from the sample, much of which resulted from the inevitable bacterial contamination. Nonetheless, others were clearly fragments of the Starchild skull's nuclear DNA, and that was what they'd been waiting for 11 years. So he carried on with this, and what he was able to do was, by this time, an enormous database had been built up at the National Institutes of Health, and they have, I think, it's on this slide or the next one, they have the complete genome of animals from about 100 different species stored in this database. So that's, probably 1 trillion base pair records, and these sequences of ACTG. So what this, the 4 amino acids, adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine, they form this sequence of letters, and you might be able to see it on this slide here. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's on one of these slides, maybe not this one. But basically, you can look at these DNA sequences and match them with species that are already in the NIH database. So if you find 100 base pairs, you might find that matches with a frog or a dragonfly or an earthworm or something, or a human. And as you may or may not be aware, human beings have certain sequences of DNA which are the same as millipedes. We don't have completely unique DNA. We have sequences which we share with other animals. And so you can come up with a percentage similarity to other creatures, which we'll come on to in 2 or 3 slides' time. So it was very unusual when he found a sequence of DNA in the samples recovered, and it was 342 base pairs, and that should have been enough to get a match, but there was no match. There was no match at all. There was no match with any species in the database. Whereas take any other sample and you pretty much would get that. I don't fully understand this slide, but basically it's like a profile of the overall variation in the DNA in terms of its different number of different sequences and stuff, or recurring sequences or something. And this, you can do this as an overall measure of what the DNA is like. And basically the overall measure, the spectrophotometer reading, was very different on the Starchild's DNA than it was on the equivalent human DNA. So that was another indication it wasn't. So remember that the only females pass along mitochondrial DNA to offspring because their eggs are so much larger than male sperm. So what they did was he then redid the mitochondrial DNA tests. And there are 15 primary genes which are very well understood, 2 encode for RNA and 13 handle proteins. So mtDNA, the mitochondrial DNA, is extremely highly conserved. There's very little variation across, down from, one generation to the next. It undergoes very little change over time, and you can use those changes to measure how old some DNA is. Now, the exact same sequence of Starchild mitochondrial DNA has 17 differences where humans and others have only one. So he's able to recover sequences of mitochondrial DNA in 2011, compare that to human DNA, and he disagreed with the 2003 results. He said that the mitochondrial DNA was not close to human. There was much too much variation. So the Starchild mitochondrial DNA would be 700% different to humans. So, for example, with humans, you have 120 mutations in the overall human population. In Neanderthals, compare that to humans, you have about 200, showing that they're fairly close to humans. In the Denisovans, they're a bit further away from being like us humans, they're 385. The Starchild was projected to have 800 to 1,000 differences. Chimpanzees were 1,500 different in the mitochondrial DNA. So we're trying to get a measure of how different the Starchild DNA is than humans, and it's very different in the mitochondrial DNA. And essentially the same was seen with the nuclear DNA. Now, what the geneticist was able to do was, by repeated sampling, he eventually recovered a gene called the BOXP2 or the FOXP2 gene. And you can look this up if you want. I went and looked this up, and it's a real thing. It's not just a made-up term. And the FOXP2 gene is quite a long one, and it has 2,594 base pairs in human DNA. And changes to this almost never happen because it's responsible for the coding of a lot of other genes, apparently. And in every person across the planet, there are only 2 variations allowed. One means that you can't speak, and the other is that you wouldn't survive. So there's only 2. The whole of the human population only has 2 variations in this FOXP2 gene. Well, when the geneticists looked at this, there was a 211 base pair fragment, and it has 56 variations. Okay, so again, it's very, very different to human DNA. In fact, it's more different than dogs, it's more different than baboons, it's more different than elephants, and it's more different than lemurs, I think. So yeah, Xenopus, a kind of frog, yeah. So this is a comparison, I don't have to read all of that, but basically the Starchild DNA that was recovered, very different to human. No comparison, really. So the geneticist that did all of this, who knows about this stuff, he said, the probability that such a highly specific arrangement of changes in a small fragment could have occurred by accumulation of sequencing errors is extremely low, if not close to zero. Nor could this arrangement have occurred due to contamination with the DNA of any known species. From this evidence, one may conclude that the underlying biochemistry of the entity's life form must either be the same as or highly similar to humans or other species, yet the use of the genetic code, which still remains universal, is distinctively different, implying that this life form is very likely the result of a markedly variant and non-intersecting evolutionary process. And as I say at this point, translation, it's not from around here, folks. But we already knew that, didn't we? And then the debunkers say, well, no experts have looked at this. Well, they have, and here's a list of 10 of them. They've been on the Starchild's website for years and years and years, probably over 20 years now, I think since many of these were consulted. And I managed to find one or two pictures of them. And also there's another one that's on this, I think, that's looked at it, which is Gary Nolan, and his name's come up in other things, in other presentations. A lot of people say, well, this skull, can we do a facial reconstruction? Lloyd was asked that all the time. Well, yes, we can, and this was done by about 2 or 3 different people. So I don't think that's meant to show an animation. No, I can't see all of that because it shows an animation. Never mind. That does come up as an animation if you run it in PowerPoint, but this thing doesn't support that on StreamYard. This was a sculpture that was done by a lawyer in the US, and he said he was abducted by Greys, and this was the sculpture that he had done based on what he saw, and that does seem to be similar to the Starchild skull shape. That kind of matches to some degree. And so when you mentioned the alien grey earlier on, then you're probably not far wrong. This was an image by Rob Roy Menzies. He was a sort of some type of portrait artist or something, and he tried to reconstruct what it would look like from sort of human looking and based on the X-ray, which was quite an interesting approach. So he came up with the image on the right there. And then we've got this image on the left, which comes from Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, which is, that was a stylized grey. The greys that people have seen don't really look like the one on the cover of Communion. I think that was another kind of, put off exercise, really. Interesting story behind the one on the left. Anyone know what that is? If you've seen the other presentation, you may have seen it. I don't know if anyone knows what that is on the left. The image on the left there. Anyone familiar with that story behind that image on the left?
The image on the left looks like, to me, in my ignorance, from the film Close Encounters.
It does, doesn't it? And I think it was inspired by that, but it's not from that film. This was used in an Amoco oil advert in the 1980s. And if you look, so-called Amoco Alien, and Bill Cooper did a presentation on this, and he reckoned that this is a picture of a real alien that they were given to use as some type of trial disclosure. And you can watch Bill Cooper why he came to that conclusion. It is a very interesting picture. I write about that picture in my book as well, based on Bill Cooper's discussion of that. I'm not sure what PSYOP writes. The cartoon proves it's an alien. I'm not sure what you mean. I need a bit of clarification there. It doesn't, of course, it doesn't prove that, but I'm not sure if there's another thing you needed to communicate.
I'm trying to find it. Where is it?
the last comment, 913. Yeah, so this was just again, what did the star child look like? Well, again, there's quite an interesting book by a chap called David Chase, who just drew what people described in their abduction experiences, and he came out with all these types of beings that people had seen, and they tried to match, what they described, and maybe the star child was like the one on the bottom right in that left-hand image. Who knows? Maybe that's what it looked like. I don't know why it's got no clothes on, but some people say that the greys are actually biological robots. So in other words, they are programmed like robots, but they're actually biological in nature, and they have DNA and all of that. Lloyd often said that he became Weird Skull Central, and people were sending photos of all these weird skulls, and he always said that the conehead skulls, they should be studied like the Starchild. We have this Peruvian skull, which this is about 10 or 12 years ago since this, at least, probably longer, which came out. The Paracas skulls, they're worthy of a separate study. Brian Forster has done some DNA tests on those. The Paracas skulls, there's plenty of those. They should be in a lab being tested properly, but they don't want to know. They don't want to see this stuff. It just destroys all their silly arguments, really. And this Peru skull was from Brian Forster. It's clearly a skull of a hydrocephalic child, really. It kind of looks similar, but you can see there are differences too. So that was a few years ago, and you can see it's sellotaped together because it can't stay together because it's a hydrocephalic skull. So there you are. It's from it's much smaller, as you see how small that skull is from a child, infant. So hydrocephaly, almost certainly. But really, there's been no new research on the skull. I've shown you everything really of note. There's a few little bits and bobs. You can look at starchildproject.com. That's the stuff on there which I haven't shown you really. There's no new information really been posted since 2012. They did crowdfunding in 2013. Then they all fell out, and Ray and Melanie Young took the skull back, and Lloyd died, and that there was just really nothing really happened. But then in 2016, something quite troubling happened, in that Melanie Young had started to speak out again, but this time she started saying that the Starchild skull was a hydrocephalic skull after all, and she said that Lloyd Pye had persuaded her that it wasn't, and that's just untrue. And I ended up she ended up going on to let's see if I've got. Yeah, I've got to go on to that. So I'll go a bit more on that in a minute. But basically, Melanie Young turned into a debunker, believe it or not. The owner of the skull turned up into a debunker. I'll give you more details on that in a minute. But you really got to get used to the idea that this is not human. It's probably almost certainly an alien skull from another planet. I don't know where. It could have evolved somewhere on this planet, like an underground cave system that was cut off from everywhere else, perhaps, or under the sea or something. I don't know, under the sea base or something. I don't know. But the DNA and the appearance, it looks human, but it's not human. Physically, it's not. The teeth show it's not. The brain cast show it isn't. The internal X-ray shows it's not human. The bone chemistry shows it's not human. I mean, how much more evidence do you want, folks? How much?
There's another thing, though, Andrew. Excuse me coming in here, but could it be? There's the hollow Earth theory, and could it be from Earth, but hollow Earth sort of thing?
I kind of implied that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it could be really, but there's still that possibility. Yeah, that it was a completely separate, set of life that evolved. It's cut off from everything else. Yeah, it's a possibility. I think it's unlikely, but we can't rule it out completely.
But the Indians, they had these sort of like folklore legends, and that was found. Again, I don't know what tribes were around that area where it was.
But also in South America, they have the star being legends that Lloyd Pye talked about, whereby the people there said that a being would come down from the stars, give them a child to look after, and then come back and collect it 7 years later or 10 years later, whatever it was, So that kind of possibly ties in with the story somehow. I don't know.
Because I know that a lot of the Indian tribes, they had these sort of legends of like insect people and all kinds of
people. That's right,
and all manner of things. Now, I don't know whether the tribes around that area had these folklore legends or not, where the skull was found. I don't know. I'd like to know. It'd be interesting. See if there's a link. But, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
So the latest was that, and this is really important to note this because of the way the cover-up works. This Chase Kloetsky came along in 2016. Now Richard Dolan published one of Chase Kloetsky's books. I think it was like a field investigated guide to UFOs or something. You can find this, it'll be on Amazon probably. But this Chase Kloetsky came along and said she wanted to look at the Starchild Skull. And so apparently she did this investigation. She did DNA tests and stuff. And they pronounced that it was a hydrocephalic human skull, And I've written all this up at length because I got wind of this. I forget how I got wind of it. I think perhaps because this Mel Fabregas guy who had me on years and years ago, he went on and he started making up stuff about Lloyd Pye. He was making stuff up about him. And so was Melanie Young. And he let this stand. And Mel Fabregas actually was confabulating and joining in and basically calling Lloyd Pye a bad man after he was dead. And I've documented all of that in this article. I'll put that link in the chat box because, really, after I heard this, I just posted this and I thought, look, I don't know who you think you are, Mel Fabregas, but you're not who I thought you were, and he posted all this trash and Melanie Young was joining in, I need to put that in the private chat, so maybe you can put it in the public one as well. But that's all on my website. It's called the Starchild Skull. I've tried to do a screen share actually. Let's have a look. See if I can do a screen share. It's going to be that one. So you might need to, I don't know if you can see that now. So that one there is the article I just mentioned about keeping the records straight. And I quote Mel Fabregas and what he said about Lloyd Pye, total liar, yet he claims to run this Veritas show. It's just disgusting, really, to see what they said. And there was no apology and no correction as far as I'm aware. He did email me, but not to correct what I'd written. He just said, why did you do that? And so because he lied. Why do you think? So it was very upsetting for me because I knew Lloyd Pye personally, so really, when that came out, it kind of killed the research. Melanie Young, I think, still has the skull. She was trying to donate it to a museum. And again, I cover that in the article at the end. But I think she's still got it in El Paso, Texas. So that's where it is. It's not in a lab. It's not being tested. No university is looking at it. It is being covered up. And why I got interested in this and why I've stayed interested in it is because there were very close similarities to Dr. Judy Wood's research. To me, it's conclusive. You can't not, come to a conclusion that this is not a human skull. It's almost certainly an alien. Same as where did the towers go? You can't not come to the conclusion that it was a directed energy weapon once you've seen all the evidence. And again, this was done over years. It wasn't just done in a couple of weeks. This research was done over like 12 years, for heaven's sake. It wasn't some conclusion that was just arrived at. Dr. Judy Wood's research, that took 9 years, I think, a lot of it. At least 7 years, if not longer. And I wrote to one guy, he had this Chase Kloetsky on debunking the skull, and Martin Willis, this guy was called, on UFO podcast, weekly or something. It's on that article I just showed you on there. And I said, look, can I come on your show and just sort of, point out some of these things which you don't appear to have got right? And he said, oh, no, I want to move on now, thanks. Wouldn't even let me talk about it. Wasn't interested. And I very rarely suggest myself as a guest. It's one of the few times that I did, because I knew that lies were being told, and I wasn't going to let those stand if I could help it. And lo and behold, he wouldn't have me on.
Well, the establishment are very, very skillful, and you look at all different other subjects. When you get close to the truth, muddying the waters and making it look stupid and making it look like lies. My theory, and even though I haven't got a trace of evidence, is that woman that had the skulls. I've seen similar situations where people suddenly backtrack and go quiet, and it's often because, and I have got evidence in other cases, they've been threatened. They've been absolutely threatened. For example, you remember a long time ago, about 20 years ago, when there was road building here, there and everywhere in this country, and there was people that were digging holes and things like that, and they suddenly went quiet. The reason they suddenly went quiet is because they were threatened. And you find that a lot, where people will protest about something and suddenly they back off because the heavy boys have gone in. So that may have happened in that situation. I don't know.
Possibly.
I haven't got so many guessing, but it does look like that. And also it looks as if we've got the what I call the controlled opposition brigade coming in to, of course, muddying the water again.
Yeah.
See,
well, anyway, I'm going to have to sort of sign off shortly, at 9:30. So if anybody's got any sort of final questions or comments, we'll take those. But
we'll zoom. I'll quickly zoom in. I'm terribly sorry if I can't read all your questions in chat, but we'll have a good try. Tadpole says, I knew the Bill Cooper story about image on left, but I'm behind in the video. Laugh.
He's probably not watching live. Yeah, he's probably a few minutes behind. Yeah.
Yes. Now we've got here. Ancient Ruby said, decent, honest man was Lloyd, and just trying to show the world important truth. I remember him, and I was very sad when I heard of his loss. And some people say that he was a very fit man. He may have been taken out. I don't know, because they came.
Well, what happened was he did talk about that before his death, and he did have a very serious tooth infection prior to his illness and diagnosis of cancer, and there is sometimes a link between that. So he did talk about that. He didn't feel that he'd been taken out, but who knows? We know, like you were just saying, they work in very dark, devious, and evil ways, and I certainly don't rule out that he was infected with cancer somehow. I don't think he did. He had the, I think he got some fairly good advice on the treatment. He could have done a different treatment. I didn't really agree with the treatment that he chose, for example. But who knows?
It is because they reckon that. I mean, Ian R. Crane, whether you like or dislike him, it was said that where he was protesting, an airplane flew over spraying chemicals. A lot of people went down with nasty things. So
it's quite possible. Yeah.
Maybe that they are pretty evil, these people that you deal with. They really are. It is so pathetic when lies and abuse come out to shut truth down, this is Ancient Ruby. Patterns are all around us with this technique. Yes, is in other areas as well.
Thanks for those kind words, Ruby. Yes, it's much appreciated.
Now, PsyOp has said, the Starchild eye sockets were flat, meaning it had fish eyes. Don't know. That's a possible.
Well, not necessarily. I don't think we don't know what its eyes were like because we don't have them. But the sockets are very different to human eye sockets. That's the main thrust of what Lloyd and I were arguing. Based on the comparison, really.
That's right. Now, on a totally different subject. Bob, I'm sorry I can't read this out for obvious reasons because I don't want to get banned. But yes, you were on at 4 a.m. I thought it was 4 p.m. You were the first one in chat at 4 o'clock. I thought this afternoon. I was researching. Yes, and I think we can read this on the screen. I think would be best. Hope you understand. I don't want to be banned again. So we're very interested. It's on a totally different subject. So we might be covering this on the Naughty Show on BitChute. Okay. So we're going to do a lot of naughty shows on there. Now let's come up here. What we got here? We got some. Now, again, I can't read this one out. I will, if you don't mind, yes, but again, it's a slightly different subject, but I'll just put it up the screen just to show. Okay. And remember, if you want to hear naughtiness, what will be banned on YouTube, watch my BitChute channel, because there's a lot of recorded shows coming up in line there and soon. So we'll look at that. And what we're looking through here. Now, this is an interesting one. So it says, just because they detect DNA they haven't seen before, don't mean it's not human. It could be lost DNA. Don't know.
Yeah, you don't really know what you're talking about, sorry, because this has come from National Institutes of Health database where they, as I say, built up data from 100 species. And if you study, go and read some books on DNA and how certain different animals have sequences in common, animals that are very different. And I mentioned on the previous program, for example, that the genome of wheat is even more complicated than human DNA. Work that one out, so you need to do some studying before you make these comments, really, to be quite honest with you.
Yes, I agree there. And this is Tadpole. With all Wikipedia entries, they get revoked back to propaganda pretty much immedially. It can only
they get locked. I mean, they claim that articles will get vandalized, so they lock them, to their own version of things. And to an extent, that probably does happen on certain things. Like they do, but they apply it in the wrong way, don't they? They apply it to things which we know are untrue when they want to keep their version of the truth, and they're fighting to the death. Anyway, I'm going to sign off now because it's after 9:30. So
thank you very much for coming on the show. You did an absolutely brilliant presentation tonight, and it really was excellent. And thank you very much. It's and please come on again. You're always a regular guest. Please,
Okay, yeah, I'd come on another time.
And because people ask about it, you say, "Is Andrew coming on?" And so I don't know if you've got anything. If you've probably got a lot up your sleeve that you can say. Because
I've got a few others. Yeah, you can look on the website. We can do the climate change one, but you might want to do that on BitChute. I don't know.
I think
I haven't been banned off. My climate change presentations are on YouTube. They haven't deleted those yet. So.
Well, no, I've got to be like I've got to put. I call it Fluffy Bunny and Tap Dancing Hamsters at the moment, because what they're taking down, they're really going for me. I think they're. I don't know what it is about me.
Anyway, I've got to get off.
Okay.
So I will wish everyone all the best. Thanks for everyone for listening and for the questions. And obviously you can stay in the room as long as you want, but you take care and thanks again.
Good night, Andrew, and see you soon. Thanks. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I can't really add to this. Andrew had to rush off there. And it just leaves me to say that this, hang on, as I'm talking, I'm trying to do two things at once here. I'm trying to find, where is it? There it is. Right. Now, this Monday, we've got Chris the Gardener coming on. And in the background, we've got, Wayne will be back on again. It was very strange what happened last Monday, in that it was almost like a demon had taken over. It was very odd, because what happened, his computer went dead, and he said that he couldn't even get his smartphone to work. There was something happening in his flat, or whatever's happening, I do not know, but it was odd. It was very, very strange. So what I've suggested to Wayne is that we do a recording. We do a recorded one. So if something goes, excuse my language, tits up, we can, it's a recorded, so it doesn't really matter too much. We can sort of sort it out. And on the subject of recording, John Hamer and myself, we're going to do another recording. And I'm not sure if Shannon's coming on. She may do as well. And then I'm also working something out with Dr. Fleetwood, and I went to see him yesterday to actually have a word with him about future programming, but he had so many people in his place, in his shop, that I didn't get much time to speak to him. But I'm going to get back to him, and we're going to try and do something by the end of the month. So that's something that's in the pipeline there. So it's all rather exciting. Well, it's for me anyway. Anyway, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining us this evening. And if you'd like to buy a coffee, details are down below in the description. And also the Telegram channel is, I haven't put the banner up tonight, but please join me on Telegram, because there's some interesting discussions on there which go further than you could on Facebook. I've got a group on Facebook which I only post in, really, and I only advertise this show on the rest of Facebook, but Telegram is a place where I am most of the time. So thank you very much for joining us, and remember, whatever happens, have a bloody good laugh, and good night.